My name is Marissa Lane. I'm 34 years old, and for a long time, I thought the worst kind of heartbreak would come loudly. I thought it would be shouting in a kitchen at midnight, a slammed door, a confession that split the room in half. I thought I would know the exact second love died because something dramatic would happen, something undeniable. But that wasn't how it happened. Mine ended quietly. It ended on a couch, under a gray blanket, with surgical tape pulling at my skin and a glass of water sweating on the side table. It ended while my fiancé stood near the doorway, checking his phone, already halfway somewhere else. The surgery was minor. That was what everyone kept saying. Minor hernia repair, outpatient, routine, nothing to worry about. But the nurse had still looked Daniel directly in the eye and said, "She shouldn't be alone tonight. First 24 hours are important." Daniel had nodded like the instruction had been carved into stone. "I've got her," he said, and I believed him. We had been together for 4 years, engaged for 8 months. The wedding was supposed to happen in June 14th. It was circled in red marker on the kitchen calendar, surrounded by little notes: venue deposit, cake tasting, invitations, suit fitting, final guest list. Daniel Harper was the man I thought I was going to marry. He was handsome in a quiet way, the kind of man people trusted because he knew how to sound calm even when he was lying to himself. He was funny, thoughtful when he remembered to be, and charming enough that people forgave him before he even apologized. That morning, before the surgery, he kissed my forehead and told me he'd pick me up at 3. "I'll be there," he said. "Don't worry." Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and something in his expression shifted. Not guilt. Not exactly. Interest. "Oh," he said. "It's Vanessa. Vanessa Cole, his ex-girlfriend from college." He had mentioned her before, always casually. Always like she was part of a life that had ended before me and therefore had no power over the life we were building now. "She's just Vanessa," he used to say. Just Vanessa. A name wrapped in old memories I had never been invited into. "She's back in town tonight," he added. "Apparently some of the old group is getting together." I was already in a hospital gown, cold and trying not to look scared. "That's nice," I said. Daniel smiled, but he was still looking at his phone. The anesthesiologist came in after that. Everything became bright lights, clipped instructions, the smell of disinfectant, Daniel squeezing my hand once before they wheeled me away. When I woke up, my mouth was dry, and my abdomen felt like it had been stitched together with wire and fire. The first thing I did was ask for my phone. There was a text from Daniel. "Running late. Be there soon." He arrived at 4:30. I was sitting in the discharge waiting area beside a nurse, who kept glancing at the clock like I was a problem she was too polite to name. Daniel rushed in with his hair slightly messy and his apology already prepared. "Traffic was awful," he said. I nodded, because it hurt to do anything else. At home, he helped me inside, settled me on the couch, brought me crackers, water, and my pain medication. For 20 minutes, he was exactly who he had promised to be. He adjusted the pillow behind my back. He asked if I was warm enough. He looked concerned. Then his phone buzzed again. He picked it up. His face changed. "So," he said slowly, "the party's at 7. I'll probably head out around 6:30. I thought I had misheard him. "Tonight?" He looked up like I was the one being strange. "Yeah. I told you this morning. You said there was a thing. You didn't say you were going." His jaw tightened. "I haven't seen these people in years. Vanessa is only here for the weekend. I just had surgery." "I know. And I picked you up. You're home. You have your medication." He gestured toward the table like he had completed a checklist. "You'll probably just sleep anyway, right?" That sentence lodged somewhere inside me. "You'll probably just sleep anyway." As if my pain was passive. as if recovery was something that happened quietly in the background, as if needing him beside me was unreasonable because I wasn't entertaining enough to keep him home. I stared at him. Isahil, Marisa, don't do this. Do what? Make me feel guilty. I'm not making you feel anything. You are. His voice sharpened. You're acting like I'm abandoning you. I looked down at the blanket over my knees. The room had gone very still. You said you'd stay. I said I'd take care of you. I did. No, I said softly. You picked me up. His face flushed. That's unfair. Maybe it was. Maybe if I had cried, begged, shouted, thrown the glass of water at the wall, things would have gone differently. Maybe if I had made the wound visible enough, he would have understood. But I was tired. The anesthesia still clung to me. Every breath pulled at my stitches. So I just said, Go. Daniel blinked. What? Go to the party. Relief moved across his face before he could hide it. Then he leaned down and kissed my cheek. Thank you, he said, as if I had given him a gift. He left at 6:25. I remember the sound of the door closing. Not slamming. Not dramatic. Just a soft click. I fell asleep around 8 and woke up near midnight needing the bathroom. It took me 4 minutes to stand. I had to grip the couch, then the wall, then the edge of the hallway table. Each step sent a sharp pain through my side. The apartment was dark. I checked my phone. No message. Not one. No, how are you? No, did you take your meds? No, I'll be home soon. Nothing. Daniel came home at 2:40 a.m. I wasn't asleep. I heard the lock turn. Heard him step inside carefully, like quietness could erase absence. He went to the bathroom, brushed his teeth, then walked into the bedroom. He did not check on me. The next morning he made coffee and asked how I felt. Fine, I said. He smiled, relieved by the simplicity of the answer. The party was amazing, he said. Then he showed me pictures. Daniel with old friends. Daniel holding a drink. Daniel laughing. Daniel with Vanessa. In one photo, her arm was around his waist, her cheek close to his shoulder, both of them smiling like no time had passed. She's exactly the same, he said. It was like college again. I sipped my coffee. It tasted bitter and metallic. Over the next 2 weeks, Vanessa's name entered our apartment like a draft under a door. Vanessa sent him a meme. Vanessa remembered an old song. Vanessa was thinking about moving back permanently. Vanessa said this. Vanessa laughed at that. Vanessa wanted the old group to meet again. I never accused him of cheating. That would have been easier. Honestly, if there had been some obvious betrayal, some hotel receipt, some confession, then I could have pointed to it and said, There, that is where you broke us. But Daniel did not break us with one clean act. He eroded us, carelessly, confident that I would remain where he left me. 3 weeks after the surgery, I sat at my desk and opened the drawer. The engagement ring was inside. He had given it back to me a month earlier because it needed resizing. I had picked it up before the surgery and placed it in a small black box behind some papers. I had planned to return it to him that weekend, so he could make a little ceremony of putting it back on my finger. I took the box out, opened it. The ring caught the afternoon light. For a second, I remembered the night he proposed. His nervous hands, his smile. The way I had said yes before he finished asking. Then I closed the box. The next day, I moved it to a lockbox in my closet. I did not tell Daniel. The wedding date stayed on the kitchen calendar for another week. June 14th, red circle, red promise. One afternoon, while Daniel was at work, I took a black pen and drew a single line through it. Not mestre. Not angry. Just one clean line. Then I sat at the table and made a list. Apartment, bank account, lease, moving boxes. Tell no one yet. I didn't title the list. I didn't write, leaving Daniel at the top. I didn't even admit that was what I was doing. But somewhere deep inside me, the decision had already been made. I just hadn't caught up to it yet. By March, Daniel was talking about Vanessa, like she had always belonged in our lives. Not constantly. That would have been easier to confront. Instead, it was little things scattered through the day like crumbs I kept finding, no matter how carefully I cleaned them up. Vanessa sent me the funniest video. Vanessa remembers that restaurant downtown. Vanessa might move back permanently. Always casual. Always harmless. And somehow, that made it worse. Because every time he said her name, I had to decide whether to react. Whether to become the jealous fiancé he could dismiss with a sigh and a shake of his head. So I didn't react. I nodded. I smiled when necessary. I became quieter. Daniel noticed, but only in the vague way people notice weather changing outside a window. "You've been distant lately," he said one night while we were brushing our teeth. I looked at him through the mirror. "I'm tired. You sure it's not wedding stress?" "Maybe." He kissed my shoulder and smiled like the conversation had solved itself. "We're almost there," he said. 3 more months. 3 more months. At that point, I already knew there wouldn't be a wedding. I just hadn't figured out how to leave yet. Vanessa officially moved back in late March. Daniel told me over dinner with the excitement of someone announcing a surprise gift. She found a marketing job downtown, he said. It'll be nice having her around again. Again. Like she was returning to a space that had been waiting for her. He started meeting her for coffee every couple of weeks. He always told me beforehand, almost proudly, as though transparency automatically made everything innocent. Meeting Vanessa at noon? Vanessa and I are grabbing lunch. Vanessa wants to show me that bookstore we used to go to. I always texted back the same thing. Okay, sounds good. The less emotion I showed, the more comfortable he became. One Friday in April, he asked if I wanted to go to a concert with him and Vanessa. "You should come," he said from the kitchen doorway. "You'd actually like her if you got to know her." That sentence stayed with me. You'd actually like her. As though my discomfort was irrational because Vanessa herself wasn't cruel. She wasn't trying to steal him. She wasn't openly disrespectful. She was simply occupying emotional space that should have belonged to us. And Daniel kept handing it to her without realizing what he was giving away. "I have work," I said. "It's Saturday. I still have work." He looked disappointed for about 3 seconds. Then he shrugged. "Okay. Maybe next time." There wouldn't be a next time. That night, after he left, I sat alone in our apartment, listening to the refrigerator hum. The place suddenly looked temporary to me. Not home, just a set. The couch we picked together. The framed photos. The wedding magazines stacked on the counter. The blankets his mother bought us. The coffee mugs with our initials. Evidence of a future that had quietly stopped existing. At 10:30, Daniel texted me a video from the concert. Vanessa was beside him in the clip, singing loudly while lights flashed across her face. Daniel was laughing. I watched the video twice, not because I wanted to, because I needed to understand why seeing it hurt so much. It wasn't jealousy. Not exactly. It was loneliness. A specific kind of loneliness that comes from realizing the person beside you no longer instinctively turns toward you first. When Daniel got home after midnight, he smelled like beer and cold spring air. "You should have come," he said, pulling off his jacket. "It was incredible. I'm glad you had fun." He smiled and disappeared into the bathroom. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the dark television screen long after he fell asleep. The next morning, I started looking at apartments. At first it was curiosity. Then it became routine. Studio apartments, one-bedroom units. I browsed listings after Daniel went to sleep. Sometimes I imagined telling him. Sometimes I imagined him finally understanding. But every version of the conversation ended the same way. "Marissa, you're overreacting." That phrase had become a wall between us. Not spoken every day, but always there. In early May, I scheduled a viewing. The apartment was on the third floor of an old brick building, about 20 minutes from our place. Small kitchen, tall windows, white walls, quiet street. The landlord asked when I wanted to move in. I almost said immediately. Instead, I smiled politely and said, "I'm still figuring things out." On the drive home, I cried for the first time since the surgery. Not hard, just silently. Tears sliding down while I stopped at red lights. I wasn't crying because I missed Daniel. I was crying because I still loved him. And loving someone who keeps hurting you accidentally is a very confusing kind of pain. That night, Daniel was on the couch texting and laughing. I already knew who it was. "Vanessa?" I asked. "Yeah." He grinned at the screen. "She sent me this video of a dog on a skateboard." He showed me. I pretended to laugh. "You okay?" he asked suddenly. The question startled me, because for one impossible second, I thought maybe he saw it. Maybe he finally noticed the distance growing between us. But then he added, "You seem tired again," and the moment disappeared. "Long week," I said. He nodded, satisfied. In May, wedding panic started setting in. Daniel asked why I hadn't ordered my dress alterations yet. I told him I forgot. He asked whether I'd finalized the rehearsal dinner invitations. I lied and said yes. He asked if something was wrong. I lied again. One evening, he wrapped his arms around me in the kitchen while pasta boiled on the stove. "We're really doing this," he whispered against my hair. "A month from now, you'll be my wife." I froze. There was still tenderness between us sometimes. That was the worst part. If he had become cruel, leaving would have been simple. But Daniel still loved me in the ways that were easy for him. He just failed in the moments that required sacrifice. And maybe that mattered more. "Marissa." I realized he was waiting for a response. "Yeah," I said quietly. He kissed my temple. "I can't wait." I closed my eyes. "Neither can I almost said. Because by then, leaving felt less like a choice and more like survival. The first week of June, Daniel asked to see the engagement ring. "My sister wants to show it off at her bridal brunch thing," he said with a grin. I kept my expression neutral. "I left it at my parents' house." "Oh," he frowned. "Seriously?" "Yeah, that's annoying." I nodded. I hadn't visited my parents in over 2 months. The ring was still locked away in my closet. June 10th, 4 days before the wedding. Daniel was in the kitchen making coffee when I told him I needed to spend the night helping my older sister with an emergency. "What happened?" he asked immediately. "She's overwhelmed. Something with her apartment." Concern crossed his face. "Do you want me to come help?" The irony nearly made me laugh. "No," I said softly. "I've got it." He walked over and kissed me goodbye before work. "Love you." I looked at him for a second too long. Then I said it back. Because I did. That was the tragedy of it. I went to a hotel downtown. Not my sister's apartment. A hotel. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the wallpaper for almost an hour. Then I ordered room service and barely touched it. My phone buzzed around midnight. "Daniel. Miss you already." A minute later. "Can't believe we're getting married this week." I stared at the messages until the screen went dark. The next morning, I returned to the apartment while he was at work. The silence inside felt heavy, like the space already knew. I packed slowly. Jeans, sweaters, laptop, toiletries, important documents. Not everything, just enough. I left my key on the kitchen counter. No note, no explanation. I thought about writing one anyway. I'm sorry. I can't do this. You hurt me. You didn't stay. But none of the sentences felt big enough to explain the hollow ache that had been building inside me for months. So I left nothing. I drove to my friend Claire's apartment across town. She opened the door, looked at my suitcase, and didn't ask questions. "Guest room's yours," she said quietly. I almost broke down right there. The wedding day arrived gray and humid. June 14th. My phone started ringing at 8 a.m. Danielle, Danielle, Danielle. Then texts. "Where are you? People are arriving. Please answer me. Marissa, what is happening?" I turned my phone face down. At noon, Claire knocked softly on the guest room door. "You okay?" "No," I said honestly. She sat beside me on the bed. "You don't have to explain." That kindness nearly undid me more than anger would have. By 3 o'clock, my phone had 37 missed calls. By evening, over 200 messages. Family, friends, unknown numbers. I turned the phone off, and in the quiet that followed, I realized something terrifying. For months I had been waiting for Daniel to notice I was disappearing, but he hadn't truly seen it until I was already gone. I stayed at Claire's apartment for 3 days. She never pushed me to explain. That was the strange thing about real support. It didn't demand performance first. It didn't require me to justify my pain before being comforted. Claire simply made coffee in the mornings, left extra blankets outside the guest room, and pretended not to notice when I spent hours staring at nothing. On the second night, she sat across from me at the kitchen table while I picked apart cold takeout noodles. "You going to talk to him?" she asked carefully. I shook my head. He deserves an explanation. The words came out sharper than I intended. He had months to notice something was wrong. Claire didn't argue. She just nodded slowly, like someone placing fragile glass back onto a shelf. 2 days later, I turned my phone back on. The screen exploded with notifications. 214 unread messages. 11 voicemails. Daniel's texts blurred together after a while. "Marissa, please. Where are you? People are asking questions. I don't understand. Did something happen? Are you okay? Please just talk to me." Toward the bottom was one message that made my chest tighten. "I'm scared something happened to you." For a moment, guilt washed over me so hard I nearly called him. Then I remembered gripping the hallway wall after surgery, while he laughed at a party with Vanessa. I remembered the silence, the unanswered texts that never came, and the guilt hardened into exhaustion instead. I sent one message. "I can't do this." The typing bubble appeared instantly. "Marissa, please answer." "Can't do what?" "Talk to me." I locked the phone and placed it face down. I did not answer. A week later, I signed the lease for the apartment I'd viewed in May. The landlord smiled while handing me the paperwork. "Fresh start?" he joked. I forced a small smile. Something like that. Moving day felt surreal. Claire helped me carry boxes upstairs while soft rain tapped against the windows. I kept expecting my phone to ring again, expecting Daniel to appear in the parking lot demanding answers. He never did. By then, maybe he finally understood that I meant it. The apartment smelled like dust and fresh paint. The walls were blank. The rooms echoed when I walked through them. It didn't feel exciting. It felt empty. But empty was still better than invisible. Daniel texted me every few days during the first month. Then once a week. then less. Sometimes the messages were angry. How could you do this to me? Sometimes desperate. Please, just explain. Sometimes heartbreakingly simple. I miss you. I never replied. In late August, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was his older sister, Rachel. He's a mess. I don't know what happened between you two, but he needs closure. I stared at the message for a long time. Closure. As if there was some neat sentence capable of explaining death by disappointment. I deleted the message without responding. September arrived quietly. I started running in the mornings because my therapist suggested movement might help with anxiety. At first I hated it. My lungs burned. My legs felt heavy. I spent most runs replaying conversations in my head. But eventually the rhythm became comforting. Step, breath, step, breath. Something steady. Something mine. I painted the apartment walls pale gray. Bought a plant. Accidentally killed it within 3 weeks. I laughed when I threw it away. It was the first real laugh I'd had in months. At night, though, things got harder. The silence in the apartment stretched too wide after midnight. I barely slept. 4 hours, if I was lucky. Sometimes I stood under freezing showers because feeling physically cold distracted me from the ache in my chest. Sometimes I sat on the kitchen floor eating cereal straight from the box because cooking for one felt unbearably sad. And always I thought about that night after surgery. The dark apartment, the pain, the loneliness. But what haunted me most wasn't that Daniel left. It was that he genuinely believed leaving was reasonable. That was the wound I couldn't stop touching. Not betrayal, not cheating, indifference. My mother called in late September. I heard about the wedding, she said gently. I leaned against the kitchen counter. I figured. Are you okay? Yes. The lie came automatically. She was quiet for a moment. You don't sound okay. I closed my eyes. I just don't want to talk about it. All right, she whispered. But I'm here. After we hung up, I cried so hard I nearly threw up. That week, I started therapy. Dr. Elaine Foster was in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and calm eyes that somehow made lying feel impossible. During the first session, she asked why I came. I don't know, I admitted. That's okay, she said kindly. We'll figure it out. The second session, she asked about Daniel. So I told her everything. The surgery, Vanessa, the concert, the crossed-out wedding date, the lockbox, the hotel, leaving. When I finished, the room felt painfully quiet. How did it make you feel? She asked softly. I stared at the carpet. Stupid. Why? Because nothing technically terrible happened. I laughed bitterly. He didn't cheat. He didn't hit me. He wasn't cruel. Dr. Foster tilted her head slightly. Marissa, she said carefully, pain doesn't become invalid just because someone else has suffered differently. That sentence followed me home. October 3rd, Friday night. I was microwaving leftover pasta when someone knocked on my apartment door. I assumed it was Claire. It wasn't. Daniel stood in the hallway wearing a dark jacket, hair messy from the wind, hands shaking slightly at his sides. For one impossible second, all the air left my lungs. He looked thinner, older somehow. Not physically old, emotionally worn down, like grief had rubbed the brightness off him. Hi, he said. I didn't move. Please, he whispered. I need to understand. The hallway light flickered faintly above him. I folded my arms across my chest, because suddenly I felt exposed. What are you doing here? I've been trying to talk to you for months. You found my address. Rachel gave it to me. Of course she did. Daniel swallowed hard. Can I come in? No. Pain flashed across his face. Marisa. What? His eyes were red already. What did I do? The question almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because of how deeply he still didn't understand. I stared at him for a long moment, then stepped aside just enough for him to see inside the apartment. The gray walls, the new furniture, the absence of him. His expression changed immediately. Shock first, then realization. How long have you been living here? He asked quietly. Since June, before the wedding? There was no wedding. He looked like I had slapped him. What does that mean? It means I ended it long before June 14th. His voice cracked. Why? The answer sat between us like broken glass. I thought about every small moment that had led here. Daniel leaving at 6:25. The photos with Vanessa. The concerts. The coffee dates. The ring hidden in the closet. The black line through June 14th. And suddenly I felt unbearably tired. You chose a party over me the night I needed you. His forehead tightened immediately. That's what this is about? The words hit harder than shouting would have. This, like it was small, like months of loneliness could be reduced to one inconvenient misunderstanding. You still don't get it, I whispered. Marisa, it was one night. No. My voice finally cracked. It was what the night meant. Daniel stared at me silently. I kept going before I lost courage. I was in pain. I was scared. I needed you there, and you made me feel like I was ruining your evening. Tears burned my eyes. You kept choosing Vanessa after that, because you never understood why it mattered in the first place. Nothing happened with Vanessa. I know. He blinked. You know, I never thought you cheated. Then why? Because you didn't prioritize me. Silence. Heavy, breathing silence. I saw the exact second understanding finally reached him. His face crumpled slowly, like something inside him collapsed inward. Oh, he whispered. I almost hated him for making that sound. For finally understanding now, when there was nothing left to save. Daniel rubbed a hand over his mouth. I didn't know, he said weakly. That's the problem. Tears slid down his face. If I'd understood, you shouldn't have needed it explained. That broke him. He looked past me into the apartment again. No photos of us. No shared blankets. No wedding invitations. Nothing. You really left, he whispered. Yes. He nodded once, unsteadily. Then, another truth hit him. You were planning it for months. I didn't answer. His eyes filled with devastation. All those times I asked if something was wrong. I wanted you to notice. I did notice. No, I said softly. You noticed I was quieter. You never asked why. Daniel covered his face briefly. When he looked at me again, he seemed smaller somehow. I would have chosen differently, he whispered, if I knew it mattered that much. I believed him. That was the tragedy. He meant it. But love shouldn't require disaster before empathy appears. That's exactly why I left, I said quietly. Daniel stood there for another few seconds, crying silently. Then he nodded. One slow, defeated nod. I'm sorry, he whispered. I felt tears sliding down my own cheeks now. But beneath the sadness was something colder. Finality. You should go. He looked like he wanted to argue. Instead, he just whispered, Okay. Then he turned and walked down the hallway. I watched him disappear around the corner. And for the first time since June, I truly understood something terrifying. Leaving him had broken me too. 3 days after Daniel showed up at my apartment, flowers arrived at my door. No card, no note, just white lilies and pale roses wrapped in brown paper. I stared at them for almost a full minute before leaving them in the hallway. By morning, someone else in the building had taken them. Part of me was relieved. Another part hurt more than I expected. The text stopped after that. The calls stopped too. Everything stopped. And somehow, the silence felt heavier than the noise ever had. Dr. Foster asked me during therapy whether that made me feel better or worse. Neither, I admitted. What do you feel? I stared at the tissue box on the table. Empty. She nodded slowly. Empty isn't the same as healed. That winter was strange. Outwardly, my life looked better. I started going to the gym 5 days a week. I gained back the weight I'd lost after leaving Daniel. My skin looked healthier. My coworkers stopped giving me concerned looks in meetings. But internally, I still felt disconnected from myself, like I was living half a step outside my own body. I woke up almost every night around 3 in the morning, always the same time. I'd stare at the ceiling while the city hummed faintly outside my windows and replay old memories like scenes from a movie I couldn't stop watching. Daniel laughing in the kitchen. Daniel holding my hand during thunderstorms. Daniel kissing my forehead before surgery. Daniel walking out the door at 6:25. My friend Claire invited me to Thanksgiving. I said yes. Then canceled that morning because the thought of sitting around happy families felt unbearable. Instead, I spent the day alone eating Chinese takeout and watching old black and white movies while rain tapped softly against the windows. At one point, I caught myself reaching for my phone to text Daniel about a scene I knew he would have loved. My hand froze halfway there. That grief nearly crushed me. Not the loss of the relationship, the loss of habit, the loss of the person who used to exist inside my ordinary days. A week later, I saw Rachel at a grocery store. She spotted me near the frozen foods aisle and started walking toward me carefully, like someone approaching an injured animal. Marisa. I turned around immediately. I abandoned my cart and walked out without buying anything. I drove around for nearly an hour afterward, gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers hurt, because if I stopped moving, I knew I'd cry. In December, I opened the lockbox again. The engagement ring sat exactly where I'd left it. Cold, bright, meaningless. I held it up toward the window and watched sunlight scatter tiny rainbows across the wall. Once, that ring represented safety. Now, it felt like evidence from another life. I looked up jewelry stores that bought back engagement rings, even scheduled an appointment, then canceled it an hour later. I wasn't ready. Dr. Foster said grief didn't move in straight lines. I'm not grieving, I argued. She gave me a look over the rim of her glasses. Then what would you call this? I didn't have an answer. Christmas arrived quietly. I flew home to visit my parents for the first time since the wedding disaster spread through both families like wildfire gossip. My mother cried the moment she hugged me. My father asked if I was eating enough. My older sister Julia avoided Daniel's name so carefully that it became impossible not to notice. His absence sat at the table with us anyway. Invisible, heavy. On Christmas Eve, I found my mother awake in the kitchen after midnight. Snow drifted softly outside the windows while she made tea. You can't sleep either? She asked gently. I shook my head. For a while we stood there silently. Then, she said something that stayed with me long after the holidays ended. Sometimes love isn't the hardest part, she said softly. Sometimes staying is. I looked at her. She smiled sadly. Your father and I almost divorced in year 3. What? He worked constantly. I felt invisible. She stirred her tea absent-mindedly. But we went to counseling. We fought for each other. We both stayed in the room even when it was uncomfortable. I leaned against the counter quietly. She left you alone after surgery, my mother said carefully. That matters. I left too, I whispered. Yes, she agreed. But not first. I flew home the day after Christmas. The apartment felt colder than usual when I unlocked the door. I turned on every light anyway. New Year's Eve arrived with fireworks exploding across the city skyline. At 11:43, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I opened the message. Hey, it's me. I got a new phone. My chest tightened instantly. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to tell you something. I started therapy. Real therapy. Not because I want you back. I know I lost that chance. But because I finally understand how selfish I was. I kept thinking, love meant intention. Like loving someone automatically made you a good partner. But it doesn't. You deserve someone who stayed when things were hard. I didn't do that. I'm trying to become someone who would. I read the message 3 times. Then a 4th. Fireworks exploded outside, while people somewhere below screamed countdowns into the night. I typed a response. Deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. Finally, I turned my phone off completely and stood on the balcony watching gold sparks scatter across the sky. Everyone around me sounded hopeful. I felt numb. January came, the 1-year anniversary of the surgery. I didn't realize the date until halfway through breakfast. January 14th. 1 year. The realization sat in my chest all day like a stone. That evening, at 9:17 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number again. Without thinking, I answered. Hello? Silence. Then Daniel's voice. Soft, careful, familiar enough to hurt instantly. Hey. I closed my eyes. I know I shouldn't call, he said quickly. I just remembered what day it was. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. How are you? He asked finally. Fine. You don't sound fine. I almost laughed. You don't sound fine either. A weak exhale came through the phone. Fair. More silence. Then he said quietly, I think about that night constantly. I leaned back against the couch cushions. The surgery? Yes. His voice cracked slightly. Leaving you alone. The honesty in his voice hurt more than excuses would have. I didn't understand what I was doing back then, he admitted. Not fully. And now? Now I know I made you feel abandoned. He paused shakily. And I hate myself for it. I stared at the dark television screen across from me. Part of me wanted to comfort him automatically. That old instinct still existed somewhere inside me. But another part whispered, where was this understanding when I needed it? Why are you calling, Daniel? Because I needed you to know I finally see it. I swallowed hard. Okay. Another long silence. Then, carefully, if I'd stayed that night, do you think we'd still be together? There it was. The question both of us had been carrying for nearly a year. I thought about it honestly. About the surgery. The loneliness. The months afterward. The resentment growing quietly inside me. I don't know, I whispered. He laughed softly, but there was heartbreak inside it. That bad, huh? It wasn't just the party. I know that now. I closed my eyes tightly. For a second, I imagined a different version of us. Daniel staying home. Daniel helping me walk to the bathroom. Daniel sitting beside me while I slept. Daniel noticing the distance afterward, before it became irreversible. Maybe that version survives. Maybe it doesn't. There was no way to know anymore. I should go, I whispered. Yeah. Neither of us hung up immediately. Finally, he said softly, I really did love you, Marissa. Tears slipped silently down my face. I know. That was what made everything so tragic. I never doubted the love. Only the priorities. We hung up. I sat there for a very long time afterward. Then I got up, walked to the closet, opened the lockbox, and took out the ring one final time. In February, I sold it. I got back less than half of what Daniel originally paid. I didn't care. I donated the money to a nonprofit that helps surgery patients who don't have support systems at home after discharge. That felt important somehow, like turning pain into something useful. By March, life finally started feeling less sharp around the edges. I slept 7 hours most nights. Started casually dating again. Coffee with a man from the gym. Dinner with someone from work. Nothing serious. I wasn't ready for serious, but at least I was trying. Then one Tuesday afternoon, I ran into Daniel completely by accident at a coffee shop downtown. Literally collided with him near the door. Oh my God, sorry. We both stopped simultaneously. His eyes widened. Marista. He looked different. Lighter somehow. His hair was shorter. His shoulders less tense. And strangely, he looked happy. Not joyful, not thriving, but healing. Hi, I said carefully. Hi. For a second, neither of us knew what to do with our hands. Then he smiled awkwardly. How are you? Good. You? Good. The word hung uncertainly between us. Finally he said, I'm moving. Oh. Chicago, new job. That's big. Yeah. He smiled softly. Fresh start, I guess. People moved around us carrying coffee cups and laptops while we stood frozen inside the doorway of our former life. There's something I wanted to tell you, he said carefully. I waited. Thank you. I blinked. For what? For leaving. The answer stunned me. Daniel shoved his hands into his pockets. You were right, he admitted quietly. I took you for granted. I kept assuming you'd always be there because you always had been. Emotion tightened my throat. I didn't handle things perfectly either. I know. He smiled sadly. But honestly, if you'd stayed, I probably wouldn't have changed. We stood there quietly. Then he added, You leaving forced me to become someone better. I looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time since everything fell apart, I felt something unexpected. Not regret. Peace. Not complete peace. Not cinematic closure. Just enough. Daniel stepped forward and hugged me briefly. Varm. Gentle. Final. Take care of yourself, Marissa. You too. Then he walked away, and this time I let him. These days, my apartment feels more like home. The walls are still gray. The mornings are still quiet, but the silence doesn't feel cruel anymore. Just honest. Some nights I still wonder what would have happened if Daniel stayed home after surgery. Maybe we would have survived. Maybe we were already breaking long before that. I'll never know, but I do know this. Love is not just who holds your hand when things are easy. It's who stays when staying is inconvenient. Who notices your pain before you explain it. Who understands that small moments become big ones when someone is vulnerable. Daniel loved me. I believe that completely. But sometimes love without awareness becomes loneliness anyway. And sometimes walking away is not punishment. It's self-respect. I'm 34 years old, single, starting over, and maybe that sounds sad, but honestly, for the first time in a very long while, it also feels a little hopeful.